So today we're going to talk about the IELTS General Training Task 1. This part is the section of the exam where the candidate needs to write a short letter. It seems simple, but many students lose points because they don't know how to identify the type of letter and end up using the wrong tone. So in this lesson, we're going to quickly look at three main types of letters: formal, semi-formal, and informal. The idea here is to understand the difference between them and how to start writing. Shall we? Let's talk a bit about it.
In IELTS General Training Task 1, the candidate needs to write a letter. This letter must have at least 150 words, and the recommended time is approximately 20 minutes. In addition, the prompt always presents 3 bullet points, that is, 3 points that need to be answered in the letter. If the student forgets one of these points, the grade may drop, especially in task achievement, because the answer remains incomplete. Before you start writing, there is one essential question. Who am I writing to? This question decides almost everything in the letter. It decides the greeting, the tone, the vocabulary, and the closing. If the candidate is writing to a company, a hotel, or a department, the letter will likely be formal. If you're writing to a teacher, a neighbor, a manager you know, the letter can be semi-formal, that is, someone you know, but not very well. If you're writing to a friend or family member, the letter is informal. In IELTS General Training Task 1, we usually work with 3 types of letters: formal letter, semi-formal letter, and informal letter. The main difference is not just the subject of the letter. The main difference is the relationship between the writer and the recipient of the letter. Therefore, before thinking about ideas, the candidate needs to identify the degree of formality. A formal letter is written to someone the candidate does not know personally. For example, they might write to a manager, a company, a hotel, a local council, a university, or some administrative department. In this type of letter, the language needs to be polite, it needs to be professional, clear, and direct. The candidate shouldn't write as if they were talking to a friend. In a formal letter, the safest greeting is "Dear Sir/Madam," and the correct closing is "Yours faithfully." This detail is very important. When the candidate doesn't know the person's name, they use "Dear Sir." Please use "Madam" at the very beginning of your letter and "Yours faithfully" at the conclusion of your letter. The tone must remain consistently professional. It is absolutely not appropriate to use contractions, slang, or very personal expressions. For example, instead of writing something like "I'm really annoyed," it's better to write "I am writing to express my dissatisfaction." And let's move on. A semi-formal letter is typically written to someone whom the candidate knows, but who is not a particularly close friend. For instance, it could be addressed to a teacher, a landlord, a manager, a colleague, or even a neighbor. There's a relationship with the person, but it's still necessary to maintain respect and a certain degree of formality. This letter is somewhere in the middle. It's not as cold as a formal one, but it's also not as relaxed as an informal one. Understood? Greeting and closing of the semi-formal letter. In a semi-formal letter, we usually use the person's name. For example, "Dear Mr. Smith," "Dear Miss Brown." It's very important to show that you've identified it as semi-formal. And the appropriate closing is "Yours sincerely." The language should be polite and natural. In a semi-formal letter, the candidate can sound a bit more personal, but still needs to be careful with the tone. It's not a WhatsApp conversation. It's still an exam letter. An informal letter is written to someone close. It could be a friend, a family member, or someone with whom the candidate is quite close. In this case, the language can be more natural, more friendly, and more personal. Even so, the letter still needs to be well organized. Informal does not mean messy. The candidate still needs to address the 3 bullet points, organize ideas into paragraphs, and maintain clarity. Greeting and closing of the informal letter. In an informal letter, we can start with the person's first name. For example, Dear Anna. None of that friend Anna stuff. And we can end with expressions like best wishes, warm regards, or love. The choice depends on your relationship with the person. If it's a close friend, love can work well. If it's an informal letter but not so intimate, best wishes or warm regards. Those are safer options. So let's do a quick comparison right here in the table just to make things clear. A formal letter is intended for someone the candidate does not know. A semi-formal letter is for someone they know, but not intimately. And an informal letter is for someone close. This is the simplest way to decide on the tone of the letter. Before writing, the candidate should think, what is my relationship with this person? Common mistake. A very common mistake is using the same tone for all types of letters. Some students write formal letters as if they were talking to a friend. Others write informal letters in a very cold, distant way, almost like a corporate email. In IELTS, this can hurt your score because the examiner assesses if the language is appropriate for the situation. The tone needs to match the type of letter. Final tip: before starting the letter, the candidate should always check 3 things. Who is the person? What is the situation? What should the level of formality be? If they answer these 3 questions, you'll start your letter with much more confidence. From there, it's easier to choose the greeting, vocabulary, expressions, and the closing. And of course, you need to know the number of paragraphs and the specific grammar used for letters. We'll be looking at all of that later on. I'll see you soon. So did you like it? In the next classes, we're going to practice each type of letter step by step. First, we'll look at formal letters, then semi-formal letters, and finally informal letters. When the student understands the difference between the 3 types, the IELTS General Training Task 1 becomes much clearer and much less intimidating. At the end of the class, if you're studying for the IELTS General Training and want a more organized path, I'm preparing a complete course over on Hotmart with classes, materials, exercises, and guided practice. The link will be down here, but only in 2 weeks, okay? And I'll take this chance to ask you to give it a like, okay? See you next time.